Okay, so we are on chapter 3, which is the chapter about labor relations. If you remember, we've done chapter 1. We've looked at human resources management. While we're on chapter 1, can I just reiterate some very important points? There are two diagrams that I say are very important. Okay, the first one is the role of HRM. Okay, it's a circular diagram with different 4 roles there. And then the second diagram is really a diagram about the factors that influence human resources management. And some of those factors are political, economic, social, ecological. Okay, those are also important. I also want to just come back to chapter 1 and say, please don't confuse the section on human resources, role of human resources management and the role of people. Equally important, both sections must be adhered to. So what am I talking about? Pay attention to the role of people in organizations, section 1.4, and also pay attention to the role of the HRM as the function. Okay. The reason why I say this, and I know it's going to happen, some of you are going to confuse the answers. There are 2 questions which talk about those aspects. What is the role of people in organizations? Okay. That question is not asking you the role of the human resources function. It's asking you what role do people play. Okay, then this that idea of a competitive advantage we spoke about, that companies are realizing that they can attain an advantage using their people. Chapter 2, we looked at the importance of labor legislation, and we established the context, if you like, on why labor legislation is important. Particularly, I say to you, there are 3 types of acts I want you to pay attention to in the book. And they're all known as substantive acts because they contain the core of what the labor relations system is about. The first one is the Labor Relations Act of 1995, particularly issues around strikes. Why do people strike? Procedural and substantive fairness, okay? Right? And remember, we also spoke about trade unions. Trade unions exercise what's known as, we're going to talk about it today, what's known as security. We will not preempt that. But also you need to also pay attention to the basic conditions of Employment Equity Act. Okay, so you could get asked the question, what does the law say with regards to ordinary working hours? What does the law say with regards to maternity leave? What does the law say with regards to... So ask yourself, put yourself as a consultant if you like. You're being asked a lot of different questions around HR-related matters, and you're supposed to provide an answer to that. So it's Labor Relations Act, Basic Conditions of Employment Equity Act, thank you. The third one is the Employment Equity Act. Now, I must be honest and tell you that that is question number 1 in your assignment. So you already know that that's covered in the assignment. So pay attention to it, and you all got the outline for the assignment? Okay. And just as a word, on the 30th of April, which is not next week, the other week, on Wednesday, we're not going to have a class. I've just decided to give that class to you time for you guys to do your assignments. Okay.
We're not meeting on Wednesdays.
We're meeting
on
Thursdays.
Thursdays.
Yeah.
Thursdays will be the 1st. So it's a public holiday.
Yeah.
Here we go. I'm getting old, sister. And I already planned everything in my head that, okay, fine, so use the public holiday to do your assignment. That would be good. Okay, it's still perfectly fine. I gave out these, just a bit of clarity on eternity. Some students have come to me saying that they are struggling logging on to Turnitin. One of the things that you must do when you go through Blackboard, you must log in with a valid email address. So you have to go to a slide which I've put down there that clarifies what you're supposed to do. Okay? Right. So we'll explain that later on alternative. So ambitious projects tonight, and it's good that you guys have come to the class. We're going to try and do 3 chapters. Okay, I'm just trying to be compact and tell you what's important so that you study the most relevant bits. Okay? And then hopefully next week, Wednesday, you do well in your test. Okay, it's not difficult, trust you me. It's one of the things about this module that I've picked up. It's a very straightforward module. And later on for you guys who are working already, it's so easy. Okay, next week Wednesday you're writing a test. Thursday. Something is happening on Wednesday, I'm not sure. Next week Thursday, you're writing a test. Apologies. Okay, so let's get started. Chapter 3. South African labor relations. And I don't mind in the end, we can actually go through and tell you from chapters 1 to 5. Have we all been receiving the emails? Did you get the email, sir? With all the stuff? So you're covered? Okay. I'm seeing you for the first time. I could be wrong.
Yes, for the first time. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to get your email address.
Okay.
So that, or somebody has forwarded the slides?
Yeah,
someone has.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anyway, let's get started. Chapter 3 is a very complex chapter because it's linked with chapter 2. But chapter 3 starts to talk more about union activity. Okay, so it's really not more about the law. If there are aspects of the law that are covered, it's probably from the Labor Relations Act and how they deal with activities of union. So we're going to go through it. Okay. In the first part of your textbook, it starts to talk about approaches to labor relations. Okay. And I think it's very prudent for us to discuss on these. Okay. They are important. I'm not saying they will be in the exam or test, but I think it will be shortchanging you guys if we don't talk about this. Okay. So everything we do in life is based upon what they call an ideology. Okay. If you look at it, the political parties, what they're selling to you guys is an ideology. This is how we see truth and the world and reality. We want you to buy into this ideology. Everything that we believe, and this is all philosophy based basically, is shaped around ideology. Okay. So labor relations as we know it, or the relationships between parties in a labor agreement are shaped around some ideologies, and this is what we're going to look at. The first ideology is known as the unitary approach. Okay. Now, the key word there is uni, which means one. Okay. So this is a one-sided approach. A one-sided approach of viewing reality as we see it. Rooted in Smith's work, classical liberalism, individual in nature, and does not recognize the collective. In other words, power is only centralized around one person or one entity. Okay? The collective is seen as dysfunctional, is seen as not helpful to the progress of getting more out of people in terms of capitalist system. The employers and the employees then assume the same view with regards to work or the enterprise. One of them is to be a manager, and the other one is to provide work. Please, let's also emphasize something. In your test exam, whatever preparation, pay attention also to the duties of an employer and the duties of an employee. There needs to be that distinction, and we covered that in the last period as well, in the last class. So pay attention to, they call them common law duties of an employer, common law duties of an employee. That's also important. In light of that, in the unitary approach, the duty of one of those actors, the worker is just there to work, the employer is just there to be a manager and also oversee what the other person is doing. So there's no relationship between parties. It's a one-sided relationship, you know, where the other party benefits at the expense of the other party. Okay. But this is not to say the unitary approach is bad, because effort is rewarded. You put in the effort, you get your reward. Lack of effort is also punished, and this hinges around a lot of motivational theories. One of them is known as the ERG theory, existence, relatedness, growth. You can actually incorporate Maslow's hierarchy of needs there as well. So the employer is also seen as caring for his employees, and henceforth what's known as the unitary goal starts to apply. Okay, conflict is negated and attributed to troublemakers. If you come with the perspective of saying, let's stand up for people's rights, you're seen as a troublemaker. Because power is centralized upon one way of thinking around the idea of work and nothing outside that. Sadly, or thankfully, the unitary approach cannot survive in the era of trade unionism. The unitary approach cannot survive in the era of democracy. The unitary approach, well, collective bargaining, an injury of one to one is an injury to all. So this is happening in countries which are very repressive. In some countries, I'm corrected, in China, union activity is minimal. I mean, in some countries they've blocked Twitter and Facebook and all these things that we have here. In this very country we are in, the president can be ridiculed in newspapers from Monday to Sunday. Okay, I'm from just across the border. We've got an act, in fact, with this reporter going on, I'm starting to get worried now. The repressive laws that protect the office of the president. If you draw anything or say anything bad about it, you get arrested. So in the era of democracy and liberal thoughts and views, the unitary approach is really eroded away. The second approach is known as the radical approach. I mean, I noticed Julius Malema loves to use this word. We must be militant and radical, okay? It really hinges around the works of Karl Marx, that to say we're in a system that is very capitalistic, we're in a system where one person is likely to gain advantage over the other person. So what we need to do here is to fight for people's rights. Okay, conflict is seen as being normal. And this is a stark contrast to the earlier one. Because in the earlier one, conflict is seen as being caused by troublemakers. In this case, it's inevitable. In other words, it's unavoidable. It does happen because those people who don't have are aspiring to get what those that have something have, the haves and they have not. So this is really an approach which is often preferred by unionists because it's an approach where we try to get people working together. Communists, if you like, can actually argue against that. Well, not against, but for that as an approach that they support. Okay, but then there are, of course, some stark contradictions. One of the greatest contradictions I often see is sometimes you hear that this person is a communist, but they are driving a car which is imported from all these countries which is exploiting the very tenets of labor that they're supposed to be standing for. You know, there are ironies there, and sometimes they are so blatant and people mustn't ignore them. The other approach is known as pluralism. Okay, this simply means, hey, let's accommodate each other. Let's accept each other, let's accommodate multiple views, let's distribute power across the floor. Everybody's got an equal say, everybody's got an equal voice in how they express themselves. So we've got multiple centers of power. That's an advantage, but that's also a disadvantage, because having multiple centers of power then prolongs issues of negotiation. Okay? Because parties want their interests and their vested interests to be always there. Compromise will always be reached, and in most industrialized societies, okay, if you like, liberal thought is hinging around that, okay, that you know what, there's multiple views. If you wake up today and you want to stay with your cow in your room, in your house, you know, turn that cow into a husband or a wife or a girlfriend, whatever. As long as it's your view, it doesn't affect anybody's right, it's perfectly fine. But then that's stretching it a bit, but within the employment relationship, it's all about power. Power is widely distributed. And then the final one, which is more what COSATU and all these guys are fighting for, is known as the societal corporatist perspective. It's acknowledged in the employment relationship, cooperation and agreement between parties. What is the best approach? The best approach is usually dictated by other forces, and now we're going back to that important diagram in chapter 1. Economic forces can shape the best approach. If you're in a country where you pledge allegiance to one leader, political forces also play a part, and you're fine with the way of thinking around that, then the ideology is rooted around that. So the best ideology is shaped by chapter 1, that important diagram I said. Okay, right. This is just an introduction to labor relations. Okay, now this is important. Okay, You need to know basic things which you probably know by now. What is a trade union? Why does a trade union exist? Why do people join a trade union? How does a trade union operate? Okay, I can promise you, we've just sent the paper this week to the exams, there are questions around it and we need to be frank and look at those aspects. Okay, a trade union is an organization that represents the interests of workers. I will accept that as a definition. Very simple, because I think at the heart of it all are things in blue: working conditions, living conditions of workers. What is not acceptable though, is if I ask you, why do people join a union? And you say, point number one, people join a union for better salaries. That's correct. People join a union to increase their wages. Okay, there's a bit of repetition in the two answers. So if you choose the salary route or the wages route, that's fine, take that. But you need to take another route, probably social activism and so forth, and we're going to look at that now. So those are some of the ideals in an organization that represents workers' interests. The primary goal of unions is what's in blue, this process called collective bargaining. Please read about collective bargaining not only in chapter 3, but later on, the last chapter that we will do, chapter 14, we'll talk a bit about that. This simply means that parties, the triad, I will introduce you to later on, come together and discuss issues with labor and how they can help people in terms of that relationship. Also, it doesn't hurt to mention examples of trade unions. You've been asked to define what a trade union is. You've defined it. For example, this is the union. Okay. I'll be honest with you. During the day group, they didn't know what some of those. Of course, they know Nehau because we're within 40 here and Nehau operates there. But ask guys, what does SATU mean? They don't know what SATU means. They know COSATU, the most popular ones. If you're going to mention a trade union as an example, please make sure you mention a correct union. Don't South African Democratic Transport Union or something like that. Make sure you call it the right words. Genosa and Naptosa, and you know some of those. Okay, Pop Crew, Sapu, Combo, and okay. This is important. Unions exercise a way of getting money, if you like, in two ways. Okay, those two ways, the first one is known as a closed shop agreement. The second one is known as an agency shop agreement. How are they different? A closed shop agreement is when one union, dominating union, the only union in the company, goes to the employers and say, we only want to be the only union in this workplace. We don't want any other unions to come in, and we will work with you guys as well in as much as we're working with the workers. Now, it makes sense for the union because the many unions, then that means membership fees are distributed across the board, so they negotiate that. Now, some people have called it undemocratic, but in some companies, it works. Smaller firms, actually, particularly, it works very well. The second way that unions generate income or money or exercise security is what's known as an agency shop agreement. Now, agency theory is a theory that places emphasis on the individual. So the agency shop agreement is to say that, look, we are all members of a union, but these guys here refuse to join the union. But when the union goes and negotiates for a salary increment, when the increment is granted, the increment affects everyone, unionized and non-unionized members. So the union is now going to those who are not members of the union and saying to them, we understand you don't want to join the union, but you pay us what's known as an agency fee. Suppose the membership fee for the union is 100 Rand. You pay us 50 Rand. Because when the benefits of what the work we do come, they affect everybody. So that's just a way of saying, let's work together. Okay. And the fee that's paid there is known as an agency fee, which is just a fee to say, look, we're representing you. And at the bottom there, remember I said you could be asked, why do people join a union? Those are some of the reasons. In some cases, you may need to expand some of these, improved economic conditions. What does that mean? Obviously, salaries and so forth. fairness and justice, social action. Social action, I'll give you a good one. The e-toll saga that was happening, was still happening. Okay, Sunrail roads that are being charged these fees for using these roads. So we're going to protest and show action around that. Social action would also say a union saying we're making a stand against HIV and AIDS in the workplace or discrimination of women in the workplace. So it's not just about money and salaries predominantly, that's what it's about with unions, but there are also other reasons, and I've provided them for you there. Okay? You want this text in your diagram. If you like to draw it, please feel free. Remember, at the top is the state, and on the side is the trade union or the employee, the employee relations, and also there's management on the other side, which is also represented by another entity, which is known as an employer organization. Okay, that's also the in your text.
But before you get to that, I would like to know.
Yes.
If, for an example, you do not want
Yes.
to pay the agency fee,
Yeah.
because you do not want no agent,
Yeah.
what happens to you?
It's a difficult one because the benefit still comes to you. I think in light of the assumption is in light of the humanity in us, is to realize that somebody is doing some important work for us. Let me either participate or cooperate. But if you don't want, I'm sure that right is respected. But I think it's...
I think the other way of saying it is that when you don't want to pay the agents, definitely you are paying the union. So that's what is normally happening. If you're not paying the agent, you are paying the union.
Yeah.
So immediately joining the union, automatically not. And it's on the, sometimes it's on the employment contract.
Yeah.
That you are supposed to join this for this.
Yeah. But let's also mention that labor legislation does not force anyone to join a union. It's mandatory.
So I'm asking this because you are not forced to join the union.
You're not forced.
You may not be the member of the union, and you wouldn't want any agency to pay.
Okay.
You wouldn't want to pay any fees to any agency.
Yeah.
Now my question is, what happens to you?
Okay, let's think of it on another side. Let's say you stay in a complex, ma'am, and there's a security guard who sleeps at the gate of that complex, guarding your assets and properties every night. And then you've had dinner. Wouldn't you want to just prepare a little lunchbox for him and say, here's a...
Remember,
what's being done by the union is not what we all agree to all the time. It will not be about salary.
Yes, absolutely.
These guys are negotiating for me because you're talking about salaries.
And
there are things that they do that other people do not want.
absolutely. And Marikana is a good example. That there were some overt issues going on where people were jostling for members. But predominantly, let's agree to say the philosophical point, ideological point we're moving at here is that the agency fee is just there to say, you represent us, here's something just to show that. But you've got that right to exercise. I did show this slide, and this is very important. Please pay attention to it. There's a question around joining and unions. Sometimes the question can be asked in a negative way. Why would people not join a union? And we look at that. Cost is an issue. Sometimes you say, why pay? But also on the other side, you've got somebody who's representing you. Sometimes there's a perception that the union is ineffective. They are just concerned about their own self-interest and so forth. No co-worker support. A student did ask me in the afternoon, what's the difference between political intimidation and employer intimidation? The latter, employer intimidation, will talk to issues around where the employer makes a standpoint to actually secretly and tell everybody that none of you are going to join a union. If you join a union, you will be fired. Okay, you've got recourse with that because it becomes an automatically unfair dismissal. But political intimidation is when, to a certain extent, when the political parties themselves start pressing on the union. And South Africa is this interesting example of this tripartite agreement is a very interesting one. I saw ENCA last night. The SACP was saying, let's teach Ronnie Castles and Madla Rutledge that, they're anti against what they fought for. Let's go and vote for the ANC predominantly. And this is interesting because they're all bedmates unions who are now making a stand for each other. You know, and that relationship in some circles, I've stayed in the UK for instance, that distinction between Labour and the Conservatives in terms of union support is very distinctive in some cases. But it works, yeah. You know, and then there was another survey yesterday on ENCA. Likely people are going to vote according to traditional support. So family support and what you've always held in the past, but that's also here and there. Those are the reasons why people join a union. Those are the reasons why people don't join a union. Pretty straightforward. Please just don't write a one sentence. People join a union because of the need to belong. Explain it. You know what will tell you? The marks will tell you. The marks usually give you a guide on what you need to explain. Okay. This is not so important, so I'm going to just quickly whiz through it. Registration of a union. How does a union get registered? They need to be seen as independent, have an address in the Republic, have a name in the Constitution. They also have obligations that they must adhere to. Not so important, but this is just general knowledge that you can keep for yourselves. Okay. Then this is important. Okay. The people who work within a trade union context will then ask you or want to know what is the role of a shop steward. Now, interestingly, the word shop steward is not in the Labour Relations Act. It's not in any of those substantive acts I spoke about. The word that's actually there is trade union representative. So if I ask you to define what a shop steward is, and you tell me a shop steward is a trade union representative, that's perfectly fine. You're within your guidelines. And then somebody raised their hand during the day group and says, sir, also the word Bible is not in the Bible. And I thought, okay. They like to stretch it a bit, but we'll accept that. So the word shop steward is not in any of those substantive acts. Rather, the word that's there is trade union representative. This is really a person, an ordinary employee, chosen by their peers to represent them in how they deal with management. I will accept that. Okay, obviously you now need to know what are the duties of the person. Okay, and I put them down there for you. The duties of the shop steward, enrolling members, seeing that agreements are adhered to, discussing complaints with management, and looking after the general well-being of union members. The number of shop stewards varies depending on the size of the company. They are allowed to take time off during work hours to do union activity and still get paid. And also they advocate for the disclosure of information. What's important there are those duties. Enroll members, see that agreements are adhered to, they discuss complaints with management, and also looking after the general well-being of their membership, their constituency, as some of them have said. I've also put a more comprehensive one. I won't go through it, but it's there in the slides that I have. If you're not accessing the slides, see me after class, and then we'll add you to the group. Okay? In as much as we've spoken about a union as an entity that represents interests of workers, there's also an entity that represents the interests of employers, which is known as an employer organization. If you like, this is like the trade union for employers, recognized under Act 66 of the Labour Relations Act. I've got some examples, again, not so important because the majority of your text covers the trade unions, okay? Some examples, here we have them. The Border Industrial Employers Association, Employers Organization for Retailers, Commuter Bus Employers Organization, and my personal favorite, listen to this, the Employers Association of Afro Hairdressing and Cosmetology of South Africa. Okay, they represent the guys who make the hair. Yeah. Bit of a mouthful, but the same rules as the registration of trade unions apply as to the registration of employer organizations. Again, employer organizations is not important, it's just for your knowledge sake. Collective bargaining, okay? What is collective bargaining? You need to know this, okay? This is a process, if you like, in a simplistic way. It's really a process where parties to the triad come together to resolve issues that affect their relationship with that agreement that they have. Okay? The most important thing the objective. Importantly, it needs to adopt a more give and take approach. And we said this last week, never go to a negotiation table with a fixed position. This is what makes this difficult in our context. The workers say they want a 200% increment. The employer is only willing to give 5%. Now 200% and 5% are day and darkness. For them to try and come to a common ground, it's very difficult. So one of the things they talk about really here is don't go to the negotiation table with a fixed position. Be willing to also give and to also take from the other party as well. Okay? The ILO provides definitions. What's important, you need to know that collective bargaining is recognized in terms of the Labor Relations Act, and what are the channels of expression. In this case, I'm talking about the CCMA. Okay, please make a note that chapter 3 and chapter 14, there's portions of the CCMA, just know that. Chapter 3 and chapter 14. We will cover chapter 14 later. Okay? What makes collective bargaining collective? And remember, this is that word we spoke about it, corporatism. Okay? So it's really the coming together of different parties to resolve issues. Right. I want to end this chapter by then telling you what's important. Oh, this is important, sorry. Okay, so how does collective bargaining work? That's the question, okay? Collective bargaining happens at different layers, okay? It can happen at the most basic level, which is the plant level in your company, okay? Parties in your company, individual employees. It can happen within the sector. I think we've got a good example last year in the Western Cape, the farm workers strike, okay? That was the most central type of bargaining. It can happen at a national level, okay? And the first one at a multinational level, it does not apply necessarily to our situation. So the three main ways under the question of collective bargaining are really these ones: national, sectoral, and plant level. Under sectoral level, under national level rather, apologies, you have a process which is known as NEDLAC. Okay? So if you like, this is how collective bargaining happens in South Africa. Number one, so the question would ask you, outline the different ways in which collective bargaining manifests in South Africa. Define what collective bargaining is, what does it stand for, why is it important, how does it manifest, what are the different bodies. You start talking about a plant level. In chapter 3, they ask you, there's a definition and aspects of workplace forum. Mention a workplace forum, a platform through which people within a particular work context come together to resolve issues. It can also happen at a more wider scale, which is a sector. Then in this case, you've got centralized bargaining. Give an example. For example, the farm workers strike in the Western Cape. If you go and dig up a bit, find out what were the main sticking issues in that argument. And importantly, at a more national level, it happens through a process called NADLAC, which is the next bit, the National Economic Development and Labour Council, which is a forum of state, business, labour, and community. When we talk about community, we're also talking about non-governmental organizations. Okay? So often people think that those have been omitted, but you've got, is this, I think it's section, forgetting which section it is, but they've been giving Minister Mocheka a hard time about the textbooks in Limpopo. Okay, that NGO. So NGO section?
Section 9.
Section 9 and 7.
Yeah,
Section 9, eh? Does anyone work there?
Where?
Section 9.
Section 27.
7.
Is it 27?
Section 7.
I will.
27.
Okay. Alright. Section 27. Yeah. It's an NGO that's fighting for education rights and so on. Section 27. Okay? Here we go.
Yeah.
So what NEDLAC then does, NEDLAC does not make laws. NEDLAC only makes proposals to Parliament, who then enact those laws and debate those laws. Okay, which is important. So the question of collective bargaining, please remember, plant level / workplace forum, at a sectoral level / centralized bargaining. It also happens at NEDLAC, which is at a more national level. Okay, and then what do I do then? I start explaining all the ways that manifests, and you can read that. Okay, remember those two ways of union security, closed shop, agency shop? I then explain it as well in the slides. You won't look at it, but you've got it in the slides as well. Okay, we had a quiz. Test yourself after you've done the chapter. We're really behind. Okay, what's important? Okay, let me tell you what's important for that chapter as we move on. Okay, obviously what's important is for you to understand the approaches, the ideologies, militarist perspective, radical perspective, social corporatist perspective. You need to know the nature of labor relations, the triad, how does it work, okay? And interestingly, on page 79, they've got a diagram there. That diagram is as important as the one which I say is from chapter 1, which is on page 9. One about the factors that influence, the macro-environmental factors that influence labor. So those two diagrams are more or less the same, and that one only takes a perspective from labor relations. Please go and read on duties of an employer and an employee in relation to the common law, what it says about them. Unions, what is a union? The different types of union. Why do people join unions? Yeah, and that's important in chapter 3. Right. Can I move on to chapter 4? No. Are you going to church? If you have to go to church, I respect religious liberties. You can go, you have to get the slides though. You can, I don't know. Okay, all right, chapter 3. Chapter 4, actually. Okay, chapter 4, interesting chapter, because it now starts to talk about the core activities of HR, okay, the human resources types of activities. And interestingly, the first activity they're starting off with is human resources planning or staffing. Now, let me be honest with you, sometimes the word would be internal staffing, same thing. Sometimes the word would be HRP only, it's the same thing. So, human resources planning, internal staffing, it's more or less the same thing, and they use them interchangeably. Okay, what is this all about? Please do know the definition of what HRP is about, okay? If you put simply, it's just a process where we try to predict the future, and so that we can meet the changing needs of the organization in relation to the future. This is where the HR person sits down and says, we've got 10 builders. We are not sure if all 10 will be with us long term, so we need to have a contingency list just in case one of them falls ill or one of them decides not to come to work. Okay, so it's a process, and the word they use there of forecasting about the future so that we anticipate any possible changes that are going to happen. Okay? And then I put another definition there. Okay, why is it important? How does it affect the organization? And particularly, I'm going to talk about the last part. Outcomes such as job satisfaction and increase in organizational effectiveness. I've got a student who's doing honors, who's I'm supervising, who's researching on the impact of job satisfaction amongst support staff in the police service. Okay, and those aspects that we're going to look at in that research probably is to help inform HRP plan. Okay, to say, based upon what we found, human resources must pay attention to the following ideals. Okay? And then I put another definition, analyzing, identifying the need for available staff, and so that the organization is able to meet its objective. It's really trying to play shrink, seeing the future and prepare and anticipate what's going to happen in the future. Not always easy. Okay, I'm going to skip all the definitions because you've got them now. Okay, now, the next bit. Why is HRP important? That's important. Okay. Why should we be bothered about human resources planning? And I've put some suggestions there for you, and some of them, let's start from the bottom. The first reason why we should even bother is because Big Brother is watching. From a legislative framework, we've got no choice, but we have to do it. Because the unions are watching, And if we lapse in any way, we saw here that you've filled up vacancies for posts by putting people from your village. The unions will come and discern and say, hey, this process is not transparent. So one of it is, please do not write, why is it important? And then you say, Big Brother is watching. Okay, Big Brother is watching is just there as a catchy phrase so that you remember it. The second one has to do with employment equity issues. On another day, I'll send you South African Institute of Race Relations. Last year, they released a study and got it somewhere there. And they found out by virtue of the color of your skin, you're likely going to earn less or more. Later on, by virtue of where you are working. So they found out that people in, most of the people, the high earners in Johannesburg are mostly white males. Okay? In the Western Cape, people who, black earners earn less than Indian earners or colored earners and so forth, you know. And that's quite an interesting and telling type of statistic. They also have another study on positions in management, upper echelons of management, underrepresented by women. Okay? And so you ask questions, why, ask the day group, why would women not be represented there? And there's some answers like, well, women get too emotional in the boardroom, so those issues might not be important to them. And then they offered another reason in that research. They spoke about what's known as the glass ceiling effect. I'm sure some of you have heard about it. That on top of every woman is this imaginary glass. Okay? This glass stops you from going forward. You just remain where you are because of this glass. And somebody says, why can't we remove the glass? And I said, well, yes, that's why we have employment equity. Okay, to try and remove those imaginary glasses that are there that stop people from advancing. Okay, the other reason has to do with obviously attitudes and concerns around people. Gave another good example that it's important to forecast or plan ahead because people sometimes are getting reluctant to be transferred to areas which may not be in line with personal values, family situations, and considerations. Then I asked the day group, in Alice, do we have a McDonald's? And they said, no. Do we have a KFC? No. Do we have a Nando's? No. Do we have a mall, a cinema place? No. And all these things that they don't have. And then I asked them the question, so how many of you, if offered a job here in Alice, would stay for that job? And I said, no, I'm not staying in Alice. And later on, by the way, the Eastern Cape is not within their plans. A lot of the youngsters want to leave that. And so part of it also, the companies must bear in mind those changing attitudes and perceptions people have towards even location as a factor. Increasing concerns with job security. I'm using Arthur's terminology there of what they call a boundaryless career, that your careers are now, this is the challenge I gave to the day group, the younger guys, that you know what, the world is really here for you. You know, the best place, and I'm not going to mince my words about this, the best place to be black in the world is South Africa. Because there's a lot of focus through employment equity, affirmative action. If you're going to pick question number 1 in the assignment, you're going to see it when you do that employment equity question. The best place to be black is South Africa because there's a lot of focus on empowering previously disadvantaged individuals. And then obviously important also to identify what is it that's causing dissatisfaction and being able to address that. This links with what's known as the two-factor theory, which looks at hygiene and motivator factors, and one of those motivator factors talks about dissatisfaction. Okay, remember I said there's that important diagram in chapter 1. In this chapter, I tried to explain that important diagram in this way. What we have here are the different ways in which people can move in a company. You can get promoted, demoted, transferred, or laid off. But what we also have on the outside are the factors that are influencing everything in the middle. So that question about that diagram is really asking you, if this is human resources and all these activities of political factors, economic factors, how do they affect human resources? Please see this in light of chapter 1, that important diagram about the macroeconomic forces. Okay? And then I give you advantages of human resources planning, also there in your textbook. Okay, what I want to go to now is this bit. This is very important for your exam as well. Okay. This is very important for your exam. At the hand of human resources management practitioners is this process called a job analysis. It's a process of just trying to make sure that in light of what people do in a job, we're getting the best value out of it. Okay. So, how am I going to ask you this question? I might give you an advert, a badly worded advert, and then I ask you to correct that advert. Okay, so I ask you to become the HR practitioner, if you like, moving away from the theoretical to the more practical. To say, imagine yourself, you've been hired as an HR consultant, please solve this dilemma in this advert, using a job analysis. So it's important for you not only to know the concept, but to also know the application of the concept, and I'm going to show you how we do that. Okay, so what you need to basically know are some of these terminologies. You obviously need to know what a job is, okay? A group of positions that have similar duties, tasks, and responsibilities. If you like, simplest way of remembering that, a group of positions that have the same TDRs, tasks, duties, and responsibilities. A position then tells you about the duties and the responsibilities paid attention to. A task then has a separate, distinct, identifiable work activities, and the duty are those specific tasks that the person does. But what's important then from this is the next bit. You need, importantly, to just know the difference between these two. Okay, let me repeat that again. You need to know the difference between a job description and a job specification. But you not only need to know it theoretically, you need to show it on paper. So, what would you do? Monday and Wednesday, the dispatch has adverts. Okay? Look at the advert, okay? If I was to look at this advert, which one is the job description? Which one is the job specification? This is where it gets difficult for me, that I don't have to explain this because these are things that we all know and we see in the newspapers on a daily basis. Okay, so what is a job description? A job description is written obviously of the content and the context. Two keywords, C squared, content and context. Concerning what? The TDRs, tasks, duties and responsibilities. On the other hand, a job specification is also written, but it contains KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. So, Fort here has advertised a position for a secretary. Please tell me whether the following is a job description or a job specification around this application. The person reports to the manager, the manager in the health and safety department. Is that a job description or a job specification?
Specification.
We're split now.
Spec.
The person must report to the manager in the health and safety department. Is that something telling us about the content and the context of the job who you're reporting to? Or is it telling us about knowledge, skills, and abilities?
Description.
It's a description, yes. However, the person must have a minimum of a metric. Specification. Okay. The person is responsible for typing minutes during meetings. Description. Guess what? The word responsible is there. And also the other clue I gave them was must. Okay, must. You must or have. Okay. You play around with those keywords. The candidate must have a minimum of a diploma, talking about a specification. But however, anything that talks about the nature of the job and the context in which they work in, so who you report Who's your line manager? Your most immediate manager. That's all part of it. So guys, this is it basically. You get a messed up advert and just draw a table. Please don't confuse it. Just draw a table. On one end of the table, you write about job description. On one end, you write job specification. And then you pick from those elements and then you just place them. That's all there is. Okay. And that's all there is to this chapter. Okay. So you know the important thing here. Define HRP. Why is it important? Okay. How do those factors in the economy affect HRP? And finally and importantly, what can we also know about job description and job specifications? Okay. Define what is the job, what is the job description, what is the job specification. Okay. Apart from knowing it from the head, can I also put it into practice? And then you put it into practice. Okay? The important thing in this chapter is about HRP. What is HRP? Why is it important? Okay? Also, how do those, go back to diagram number 1 in chapter 1. Those economic, ecological factors, how do they affect HRP? Then we take a jump, job analysis. What is job analysis? Under job analysis, we've got concepts such as job specification and job description. Okay. You also then must know how job description and job specification affect the entire HR activity domain. How do they affect training? How do they affect it? That's simple. It's all in the text, by the way. Importantly, you get a messed up advert, and then you need to arrange things and put them onto order. The second thing they may also do, but we'll do this when we do training and development, they'll give you a messed up advert, and they tell you to apply what's known as the AIDA formula. Have you heard of that one, right? That for an advert to be effective, it must get the person's attention, interest, desire, and action. Yeah, AIDA, but we'll talk about it when we cover training. It's not in the test that you're writing. For instance, that's the Musimaimani advert. I thought that's a brilliant advert, eh? The DA one. What do you think? Am I allowed to express a personal opinion?
No.
I thought it was a good advert.
Yes, it is.
The one where you do ANC, yeah. And when I see Musimaimani with all those campaign trails, I see Obama, eh? There's an element about the Obama thing.
That's okay.
Yeah. Another company that does great adverts is Nando's. Yeah. Kulula. When you do training and development, I'll show you some of the Kulula adverts. Brilliant. Okay. So, the last chapter, which you are supposed to do for the exam, chapter 5. Okay? We're making good progress. It's only 6 o'clock and we've done 2 chapters. So you guys might go home early today. Okay. Right. Staffing. Alright. The most important things that are in this chapter are these 2 concepts. Recruitment and selection. Okay. So, no matter how, if you want the summary now, this is the summary. You just need to know recruitment and selection. You need to tell me about recruitment and selection and we're going to look at it. Particularly, there may be variants. Give me advantages of recruiting internally over recruiting externally. And so forth. Externally over internally. What are the different methods of recruitment? Okay. So let's clarify the concepts. Both of them are processes, capabilities, activities, whatever. The one is used to acquire people, okay, from an available list of pool of candidates, whereas the second one is really now selecting the best person who is suited for that particular job. Now, this is very difficult. It's very difficult because some of you have mastered the art of interviews. I'll give you an example. You're going for a Kaiser Chiefs vacancy, they've advertised for a PR manager. Do you go wearing your Buccaneer blazer? No. At least if you're not going to wear a Buccaneer blazer, wear something, a yellow tie. And you've hinted towards them. So sometimes because of that, a lot of biases are in the processes of recruitment. Sometimes we often confuse candidates that talk a lot to candidates that will deliver. I'm an academic, I sit and recruit postgraduate students. And I know very well, the first thing I know, usually somebody's, oh, yep. And then you're really saying, there's more to this person than what we're seeing now. And the worst thing that you realize later on, after the yep, you've taken this person on board, they don't deliver. And you're like, we fell with it. But then you also have candidates who are very quiet, reserved. Okay, well, when I was growing up, which is not a long time ago, I know very well if you were talkative, it was attributed to intelligence. This is an intelligent child. Later on, if you could speak English very well, this is going to be a very intelligent child, and you've got this poor guy who can't express himself, but because of that. So, recruitment selection, particularly recruitment, difficult because of those biases, and we're going to look at some of them. Okay? Right, so what is it about? It's about attracting a pool of candidates, and then we choose the best person, and this is taken from your text. It's as much as important human resources function as other ones. Now, I want you to link this with the previous one. Please do note when we spoke about job description and job specification, the question could also be, explain how the job description and the job specification affects every human resources function. So I'm talking about recruitment, I'm talking about selection, I'm talking about performance appraisals, training and development. Okay. So you will also see elements of some of this as we go on. Okay. Bias and root talk about recruitment as a process from a pool of applicants. Brayton and Gold talk about generating from a pool of capable people. Use any of those definitions, totally acceptable. Okay. Newell and Shackton, recruitment is necessary so that we build a positive employment relationship between the employer and the employee. The relationship then is based upon these reciprocal expectations we talk about, and it's really an attempt to predict how a potential understanding of expectations can be met. Okay, so it's really a way of saying, based upon what the culture we have in our organization and the candidate we're talking about, can these two be in sync together? Yes or no? Management today, 2002A, the overall objective of the process is to find the most suitable candidate in the shortest time frame. Very difficult. Because sometimes processes of recruitment drag. Okay, I'll tell you a requirement by law. If a foreigner is going to apply for a job, that job must have been advertised in a local newspaper for a long period of time before that job is given to a foreigner. Okay, what they're talking about here is that the necessity to prolong the process. But the truth of the matter is that companies can't afford that. To wait 6 months before the Home Affairs is satisfied, and then they say we employ. So it really is about the shortest time possible in taking somebody else. It follows a process. We identify, oh, this is important. Forgot. Well, the process, any chapter, this just establishes a rule, any chapter that you'll study, please pay attention to the process. The steps, basically. Amos and colleagues use the word steps, sometimes they use process. We need to identify the need to recruit. In training, this is called a needs analysis, but in recruitment is also a gap that we're trying to fill. Number 2, update our job description and our job specification. So remember that question, how does it link? Well, stage 2 of the process requires us to go back to the job description and the job specification. Okay. Refer to an internal policy or a code of practice that may exist. Take into account factors that may influence the program. I think number 4 talks back to that diagram in chapter 1, the diagram I keep on emphasizing on. Consider the different sources. This is where it's also important. 2 sources of recruitment, internally and externally. Now let's answer the question now, and then in a few weeks' time when you answer this, or next week, you'll remember it more. Somebody tell me, why is it advantageous to recruit internally rather than externally? It's cost effective, yes. Familiar with the process and the job, yes. Opportunities to the internal candidates as much as for the external ones, but internally, yes.
It shows trust.
It shows trust. Yeah, It shows trust. You need to explain it, but I'll accept it. Yeah. Why would we not want to employ, recruit internally and prefer getting outside people?
To get new
When you advertise a post internally, it is when you have identified the skill in the system. Maybe when she joined the company, she was a secretary. Now we can see that she's got all the skills to be office administrator.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you guys heard of fronting?
Huh?
Fronting.
Yes.
It's a process internal where they say we are only advertising externally, so that for
Mere reason we know we're going.
yeah, we already know. And, I couldn't understand that, but I kind of thought about it this way: that you also want to be seen as doing an external process. But you already know who you're going to give the job to. Now imagine you are that candidate competing for that job. You've dressed up nicely for the interview, you've gone there, and to know that, you know what, you're wasting your time. They already have their own guy.
I think that they have to do what they are doing with the promotion, because the promotion that is done inside, they've got to have a statement that only the candidates that work in that in that department,
Okay.
in that area of focus,
Yeah.
that are allowed to apply. So anyone that mustn't bother to apply, because they know that they are going to promote a certain person in that department.
What gets me is the fact that you can work hard for a process such as this, and somebody whose uncle is an HR director can rock up 2 days after the closing date and give the uncle the CV, and it's put as a priority.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's happening.
Yeah, it's happening.
When it is transparent, when it is transparent, when the interviews are transparent, it's so risky. Because you go to the interviews knowing that you are going to appoint someone, or this position is for someone.
Yeah.
And if that particular person didn't do well, you don't have a choice but to give it.
Yeah.
It happened.
And then we waste money on buying lunch for the panel.
No.
Then we print all these big books for the panel to read and say, oh. And then we stroke the ego of people who are going to reject. Oh, this is very impressive. We're very impressed by it. But really in our heads we know we've got our own candidates. Externally also, another advantage which is there is that we get new fresh talent.
Yeah.
People who are not contaminated by the politics of the office. Okay, but however, from experience, coming into an organization as an external candidate, now when they start talking, they can tell you that, you know what, people are against your appointment. I'm like, yeah, you know, even if you get someone internally or externally, there'll always be dissenting voices on either side.
Yes.
Okay, so please pay attention, internal, external advantages, disadvantages. Then we choose the appropriate recruitment method. We develop the advert. We then put the advert in the most suitable communication medium, and we ensure that application blanks are available. What simply means is we've got places on application forms where we also get a written narrative from people to actually understand them, more about them, and also for the panel that is sorting this out. This process is important. Internal, external, very important, okay? What's also important is the medium question. We're going to look at what makes a good advert when you're advertising as an HR person, and we're going to look at that. Okay, let me see the next one. What makes a good advert? Well, that's what makes a good advert, okay? A good advert needs to pay attention to these areas. Number one, it's called the AIDA model, okay? AIDA model. It should attract attention, okay? Let me say it because this is social reality. You see the latest car being advertised by a woman who's half dressed, and you're like, okay, I can see the car, I see the woman, but what's the link? What's the link? Because they want to get attention. Okay? Please, I'm sorry, but this is just reality, and you guys know it. Okay? Try to pretend.
And it's mostly the guys who look at that time.
Yes, yes, yes. But, I mean, did you know that sometimes in some malls, and I didn't believe this until I saw it happen, stayed a bit in Ireland, they take these perfumes and spray in the shopping mall. And the belief is that those perfumes encourage people to shop more. And when they say people, they're talking about women.
Sure.
It's the latest thing that's happening.
Yes.
Music, they play in a shopping mall. They don't play, what's that, Bachucha song there? They don't play that. They play the more mellow sentiment around Christmas time. And then you find yourself, they leave chocolate at the till point. And here you are, like, oh, I've won my battle against stopping at that aisle. It's right at the till point. So we're both males and females, we are affected by all of this. Ideally, the first phase of that process is we need to get people's attention, and we need something that attracts attention. Bright colors, for instance. I like Bantu Olomisa's adverts, you know, the ones that drive into East London, the UDM ones. I don't like Julius Malema's ones. Something's wrong with his cheeks. He looks so... I think he looks sad and angry. And he is angry, but... Okay, the second phase of the process is to secure interest. Okay, so it's not enough that we've used bright colors to get your attention. We need to get you interested in the product. Hemingway's shopping mall. There are these guys who are always wanting to sell, and they don't speak proper English. They say, darling, please, I want to show you something. Have you seen those guys?
Yeah.
Ambushing people say, I want to show you something. And they look at your faces, by the way, they say, look, this one's got no potential. And then they say, I want to show you something. So they must secure your attention and interest. Sometimes by virtue of stopping you, they've won the first phase of the process. You're now listening to them. Okay. Then you now build desire for the product finally. 48 the other day, Sister, we got an email saying there's pork tasting. Remember that?
Yeah.
You know, people are like, pork tasting, wow. So you've got in shops, people say, oh, taste this for a bit, and here's a bit of wine, the latest wine, use it, and so on. So the idea, what they're doing there is building a desire for the product. And finally, based upon thorough work on these phases, we then get a commitment, get action. Would you like to sign here so that we deliver this in the post for you? So this is the model that is used for advertisements. Now you could get a question that is concerning a badly worded advert, and you must then use AIDA. So what you need to do is obviously define AIDA. It's a model that's used in advertising, okay? And basically it's about attracting people's attention, and then you explain each of these phases, and then what you then do practically, go to the advert. Let me ask just as a general show, your best adverts on TV, which ones are they? There's no right or wrong. Which is your favorite advert on TV?
Vodacom ones.
The Vodacom ones.
Yeah.
Okay? Why?
Their style of.
Okay. Best adverts? Castle Light? Is it the one that blows? Yeah, okay. Yeah? Your worst adverts, which one are they? So by asking those two questions, you're then able to actually apply the model. Your best adverts should score high on this model, and your worst adverts should score low on this model. Okay, so that's the AIDA model. Okay, and then we explain each of the phases, what is it about, and then you can obviously read that. Okay, right, and I say this is also important. You need to know the two different methods of recruitment, internal or external recruitment. And about that, oh, here are the advantages. Advantages for internal recruitment, it's less costly. Okay, I've just put it in simple terms. Please explain more, okay? I don't mind you then identify that as the generic label around what you're defining, but please explain it more. Employees are already familiar with the company, and it can help boosting morale within, okay? Lack of new blood. Departments can raid other departments for best employees, so it's this internal process of actually getting other people's better skilled people to join your department. Okay, these are more advantages internally. Externally, new blood, new perspectives, cheaper than training a professional. No group of political supporters in an organization, assuming this is a clean person who's got no issues with anybody. It may bring competitor secrets and new insights. Companies such as Microsoft, for senior executives, they're not allowed to join competitors because of trade secrets and so forth. Helps meet employment equity needs. Disadvantages may not select someone who will fit. As a result, it causes morale for those who are internal candidates because they feel left out. Longer adjustment or orientation time, and may bring in attitude from a previous company, which you don't want in your current company. Okay? Remember what I said? In every chapter, pay attention to the processes. These are the processes of selection. So we've recruited the person we want. The next part is to select the person. We shortlist candidates. We contact them. We conduct interviews. We check their background. Okay? Now, this is an important one because someone would say, well, background information I can just write. Some people do check with background checks. Things like your financial status, your criminal record, and so forth. Ensure that medical examinations, this is important, are conducted if required. Now, we did say in chapter 2 that by law, you are not allowed to conduct any form of testing in the workplace unless it's an inherent part of the job. If you're a paramedic and you work with people who get injured and there's blood there, they might ask you to go and do certain tests. However, if your job does not put the greater public in harm, then if they force you to do that, then that's not permitted. That applies to not just tests, HIV tests and so forth, but also psychological tests. Okay, in any case, if somebody is to use a psychological test, they must be certified with the Health Professions Council of South Africa. And then we make a final hiring decision, make a job offer, and then we ensure that all the records are kept of what has just happened. Please pay attention to that part as well. And then that's that. I need to just stop this so that I can give you some clues here.